My guest today is Dr. Joe Dispenza, the international speaker, researcher, and best-selling author. Your interest lies in demystifying the mystical so that people have all the tools within their reach to make measurable changes in their lives. You've traveled the world educating people about the role and function of the human brain, and your research in the fields of neuroscience, epigenetics, and quantum physics has led you to develop a practical formula to help people transform their lives. As an author, your books, including Becoming Supernatural, Evolve Your Brain, The Science of Changing Your Mind, and Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, have all featured on the New York Times bestseller lists. You believe that by holding on to the emotions of the past, people from all walks of life struggle to create a new future for themselves, limiting their potential and ultimately their pursuit of happiness. Your teachings help me process my own long-held trauma about my parents' divorce, were instrumental in empowering me to change my perspective and deal with my own unconscious behaviors. So Dr. Joe, welcome back to London Real.
Thank you, Brian. I'm always happy to be with you.
Oh, man, so great to have you here. The last time I think you were here was 3 years ago, and I was about to take a trip home to San Diego to confront, film, talk to my parents about the divorce that happened when I was 7 years old, and I was very anxious. This was coming back off the back of some work I had done with some psychedelics and some introspective, and I think I was leaving the week after, and you were here, and you gave me some incredible advice that was featured in the film, and I just want to say thank you for that, because it was literally everything that you've been talking to me about for so many years. And you said, Brian, you have this memory that isn't necessarily the truth, and you need to examine it to find out how you can go to the next level. And I literally did it in real time with your voice narrating through this film. So thank you, because now I look at that event very, very differently, almost empowering to me as opposed to this limiting belief. But I was stuck in my brain in the past with this memory. So
I think when our perception about the past changes, our perception about the future changes as well.
Oh, man, so much so. And it was so strange because I just locked onto this narrative and I just ran it on autoplay in my brain. And of course it was true because I said it was true. But when I actually spoke to my parents and realized that this wasn't the worst thing that happened to me, maybe it was the best thing that happened to me, and maybe one of the best things that happened to them too. And it wasn't them letting me down as a child. It was almost letting them each break free and become the versions of themselves they needed to be. And so sometimes I actually have to correct people now when they say, oh, your mom and dad did that to you. And I'm like, no, that's not what it was. It was actually something that I see now as a defining moment for me as a human as well.
Sure. And I think it's important for us to examine that because it's so easy to become that, later on in our life, because that's our exposure to what we think love is, what we think family is about. And it's just the narrative or the story that we tell about the past that fills in the gaps of the things we don't understand. So we make up a story about that part we don't understand, and that becomes what we fire and wire in our brain. And then that analysis really there's no answers in that analysis. I think we have to step outside of the analysis and the emotions to kind of see it the way it really is. So I think it's healthy, and for the most part, I think we can change as a result of it.
Is this a lot of the work ultimately that you do with people? I know you do lots of different things, and I want to get into it today, but is looking at some of those loops or those traumas of the past or those memories and trying to free them up to move to the next step, is that a big part of what you do?
The process of change, what I've discovered, requires unlearning. That's the hard part about change, is unlearning, and then it's relearning. It's literally breaking habits that we have within ourselves, and then after we break those habits of thought, of behavior, and emotion, is to reinvent a new self. It's pruning synaptic connections and sprouting new connections. It's unfiring and unwiring and refiring and rewiring. It's losing your mind, really, and creating a new one. It's deprogramming and reprogramming. It's unmemorizing emotions that are stored in the body and then reconditioning the body to a new mind and to a new emotion. And so everybody has a story about the past or their past. And we tell those stories based on the emotions we experience from the past. And the stronger the emotion that we feel from some incident, some experience in our life, the more altered we are inside of us, the more we pay attention to what's causing it. And that moment becomes a moment frozen in time. And the brain takes a series of snapshots, and that's called a memory. So then we think neurologically within the circuits of our own personal subjective experience of that reality based on the feeling that we get from the experience. I think the problem is that most people don't know that when they think about the event, they're producing the same changes chemically in their brain and body as if the event was occurring. So you review the event 50 to 100 times in one day, and it takes the thought and the feeling, the images and the emotions, the stimulus and response that starts the conditioning process of the body actually living in the past. Now the challenge is the firing and wiring of that memory may not be the truth, but it's the truth for you. And the emotions then become the boundary of what feels familiar and what feels known. And so the person can actually live a healthy life and go on with their life a whole way in spite of the trauma. The challenge is by living by that same emotion, it becomes so familiar to us that guilt or shame or unworthiness or fear just becomes how we normally feel. And so those feelings tend to drive our thoughts, right? And if you can't think greater than how you feel, and feelings and emotions are the record of the past, then for the most part, you're thinking in the past. And if how you think and how you feel creates your state of being, well, your entire state of being is in the past. Now, the challenge is that the body is so objective. It doesn't know the difference between the event that created the trauma 15, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago and the chemistry, the emotion that you're creating by thought alone. The body's believing it's living in the same past experience. So then the person is actually viewing or perceiving reality through the lens of the past. And so anything that triggers anything that they can associate that's relatively familiar, then the big thing is get ready because you don't want that to happen again in your future. So the brain is always forecasting the worst case scenario based on the memory of the past. And now the brain is actually coming up with that worst case scenario because if you prepare for the worst, there's better chances of surviving whatever that trauma is going to be again. So the challenge is then is that we start out of the infinite potentials in the quantum field. We're selecting really one of the worst outcomes we could possibly imagine, embellishing that outcome, and then emotionally embracing that future before it happens in the anticipation of the event. And now we're taking that thought and the feeling, the image and the emotion, the stimulus and response, and we're conditioning the body and the brain into looking like that future event has already occurred. And the stronger the emotion we feel from whatever we're imagining, the more we pay attention to what we're imagining. And we're embossing that circuitry further in the brain, and we're emotionally conditioning the body more into that emotional state. So if the familiar past in the conditioning process is the known, and the predictable or anticipated future is the known, there's only one place where the unknown exists, and that's the sweet spot of that present moment. Now, the person can live a normal life feeling those emotions and being successful and having relationships and all that stuff until it comes time where they get a diagnosis. Or it comes time where they go bankrupt, or there comes time where they are ending a relationship, or something goes wrong where they want to create a new career or a new life. And now, all of a sudden, they come right up against their past. Why? Because that's what's been defining them all along. And all I'm asking them to do is stop telling the story of your past and start telling the story of your future. Stop believing in your past, real or imagined, and start believing in your future. Stop romancing the past and let's start romancing a future. So the unlearning process then, 95% of who we are is a set of memorized behaviors. Automatic emotional responses, unconscious habits, hardwired attitudes, beliefs, and perceptions that are automatic like a computer program. So if we're in a program, then we're unconscious. So in order for us to change, we have to become conscious of our unconscious thoughts and the story and the narrative that we tell and those memories to become familiar with how we speak or how we act and become so conscious that we don't go unconscious to that behavior. And then we have to look at the emotions that we live by every single day and realize, are these emotions loving to me? And then all of a sudden name it. Wow, this is actually guilt. I just didn't know it was guilt. Or unworthiness. It's just how I normally feel. And I use everything and everyone in my life to make this feeling go away. But if I'm relying on my outer world to change my inner world, when things are good, I'll feel good. But when things are bad, I'll feel bad. So changing your emotional responses to the challenges and circumstances in your life and no longer living by that emotion is no different than the withdrawals we get from a drug, because no new information can enter the nervous system that's not equal to the emotion the person is processing. So then you can tell the person the answer to the problems in their life, but unless they overcome that emotion, they'll be perceiving reality through that lens, the lens of the past. So then the fundamental point here is that the trauma then that the person is experiencing from the past, they're reliving that every single day. So then when it comes time to be defined by a vision of the future, if you're living in the past, it's so much easier to forget that vision than to remember it. So how do we remember the vision of the future? Well, we got to feel the feeling of the emotion before it occurs, before the event occurs. And if you're feeling the emotion before the event occurs, if you really practice trading resentment or impatience or sadness for an elevated emotion, you teach people the science behind that. If they're feeling the emotions of their future, they'll believe in their future more than they believe in their past. Teach them how to hold the intention of what that future is. And you take that thought and the feeling, the image and the emotion, the stimulus and response, and you can actually condition the brain and body into a different state of being. What's the importance of that? Somehow, the disease is there, and now the disease is gone. Somehow, the person's life wasn't changing because they weren't changing. The moment they start changing the way they think and the way they act and the way they feel, all of a sudden their life starts to change. So what's the importance of that? Well, if you're doing the work and you're seeing your life changing, you're going to want to do more of it. So you become a work in progress. So then you're always looking for the blind spots. It's no longer about your healing. You're not asking the question, why am I not healing? The real question is, what do I have to change about myself in order to heal? Right. Now it becomes very practical for the person. So the unlearning process is one of the hard parts because you've got to light a match in a dark place. And if you're conscious, that means you're no longer unconscious. And if you're conscious and you're no longer unconscious, you're no longer in the program. So we begin to objectify or object ourselves. So how many times do we have to forget until we stop forgetting and start remembering? That's the moment of change. How many times do we have to go unconscious till we stop going unconscious and start staying conscious? That's the moment of change. And God, we get numerous opportunities in life. Every day is one lifetime. And if you just decided before you started your day who you no longer wanted to be in thought, behavior, and emotion, just remember that, stay conscious of it, and who you do want to be. And think about the thoughts you do want to think. Rehearse how you're going to behave in your life with your family, with your kids, at work, on the Zoom call. And think about, what emotions do I want to live by as if my future has already happened? So the cool thing about that is if you're feeling the emotions of your future before it happens, you're no longer looking for it. You're only looking for it when you're feeling the other emotions. When you feel those emotions before it happens, somehow those wonderful synchronicities and coincidences and opportunities begin to show up in our lives. And that proves to us we're the creators of our lives.
Does that happen with affirmations and visualizations, or is it require more? Like you talk about getting from the 3D space into the quantum space. You talk about trying to disconnect your brain from doing those patterns so you could start to see things. So is it a little more complicated?
I'm not a big fan of affirmations. I mean, people have affirmations all day long. Most of them are unconscious. I can't learn very well. I'm not a good meditator. I'm unhappy. That's their affirmation. Or every single day they wake up in the morning and they think about their problems. And their problems are memories from the past that are etched in their brain. The brain's a record of the past. The moment they start thinking about their problems, since their memories of the past are thinking the past, every one of those emotions has an association with it, emotionally from the experience. So the moment they feel unhappy, now their body's in the past. Keep doing that over and over again, and the body literally will be unhappy. And you could say, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy, all you want with your conscious mind. I'm wealthy, I'm wealthy, I'm wealthy. I'm abundant, I'm abundant, I'm abundant. And your body's saying, no, you're not. You're miserable. And that thought never makes it past the brainstem to the body. So then, visualization then, if the person is visualizing the future that they want, but they're living in fear, the fear is actually not supporting the vision of the future. They don't believe in that future. So it takes more than that. So then what we discovered was that there's a formula, a way to teach people based on over 18,000 brain scans we've studied, over thousands and thousands and thousands of measurements on the heart, on gene expression, on protein regulation, on neurotransmitters, on immune regulation, on thousands and thousands and thousands of different cellular metabolites, looking to see what is it that truly causes a person to change. And it takes a reboot. And in fact, when you stop thinking, when you stop analyzing, when you're no longer paying attention to your body, you're no longer aware of your emotions or your habits or your drives, when you're not thinking about the people in your life or your cell phone or your social media or your car or where you need to go or where you're sitting or where you sleep or where you work, and you're not preoccupied with time. There's a wonderful thing that happens in the brain when we become nobody, no one, no thing, nowhere, no time. That's the moment where we shut the mechanism down of thinking, and by focusing on nothing, on space, there's a recalibration of the nervous system back to more order, back to more wholeness, back to more oneness. And if you're going to marry a clear intention with an elevated emotion to create reality, you better have a coherent brain, because that's the mechanism that sends the signal out. That's the directive. That's the intention. That's the possibility. It's the creative center. And if you're going to combine it with an elevated emotion, if you're going to believe in that future that you're imagining with all your heart, it better be open. You better learn how to activate it, and you got to feel into that heart of yours. And when you do, you begin to change your electromagnetic field. In fact, you have a Wi-Fi signal, and if the thought sends a signal out and the feeling draws the event back to us, if the thought is the electrical charge in the quantum field and the feeling is the magnetic charge, and the heart has a magnetic field, and this is beyond polarity, this is wholeness, this is oneness, this is the union of opposites. That means that we have to feel the feeling before the experience, and not wait for the healing to happen to feel gratitude, or the new relationship to feel love, or the wealth to feel abundance or worthiness, or the mystical moment to feel awe. That would be cause and effect. We want to cause an effect. So then causing an effect in your life then means then you have to lay down the very thing you use your whole life to get what you want for something greater to occur. And that's a big step for a lot of people. What's the significance of that, okay? We can all get successful. You can learn certain skills, you can be trained, you can make the right choices, you can learn from your mistakes, you can take more courses, more seminars, you can go at it matter to matter, and this is the plane of doing.
Brute force.
Yeah, you can get there, you can force the outcome, you can control the outcome, you can compete for the outcome, you can manipulate the outcome, you can predict the outcome, you can plan for the outcome, you do all those things. There's rules in this three-dimensional world. And when the experience happens, then the experience produces the emotion. It takes away the lack of not having what you want. You get the new car, you get the new relationship, you get the better health. You wait for the experience to occur. The experience then, the end product is the emotion, and it fills the lack or separation. But we create that way. You see someone with something you like and you don't have it, your brain naturally starts thinking about you having it. We're creative by nature. But in the 3D world, you got to wait for the experience. You got to do something to make it happen. And of course, doing requires time and energy. So you can get really good at that, and you can collect resources and savings and all that stuff, and you can do it easier. My interest is another way. I want to shorten the distance between the thought of what we want and the experience of having it, between the cause and the effect, and that's called time, right? So if we're creating from matter, then there's a lot of things that we have to do to get what we want. And if we're living in stress and we're living in survival, now we feel more like matter and less like energy. And now those hormones drive us in our animal nature to try to get what we want. But sometimes, people cheat, they steal, they lie, they do whatever they can to get what they want. That's the game. But then if you can create from the field instead of from matter, it's not matter that's emitting a field, it's the field that's actually creating matter. So if you could change the field and change the information in the field, is it possible then you can change the experience in three-dimensional reality? And the closer you get to singularity, to source, to oneness, to wholeness, to absolute, whatever you want to call that, and you're creating from the field instead of from matter, every thought in the quantum produces a frequency. So the thought of your wealth in the quantum should produce the frequency or the feeling of abundance. And if you can experience the feeling of that ahead of the actual event, you're beginning to change information in the field. Keep doing that. Thought objectifies and conditions reality. So you create a thought form, and in time, all of a sudden, you start having these synchronicities and these outcomes in your life. If you can't get beyond your body, and your attention is on your body, then you're matter trying to change matter. If you're thinking about your cell phone and your partner or your kids, or none of these are bad, but if you can't get beyond them, they own you. If you're thinking about how much time it's going to take or how much time the meditation is going, you haven't dissociated from the very world of three-dimensional reality to create something differently with. So that process of overcoming ourselves, that process of overcoming is the process of becoming. As an example, people stand on the stage, and they tell their testimonials, their stories at our events, whether it's stage 4 cancer, blindness, deafness, MS, lupus. We've seen just about everything. Parkinson's. Many people say, I really believed that this information, or that you could actually create a better life for yourself, or you could heal yourself. I always believed that it was true, and I saw the testimonials of other people. I've read the information. I saw the scientific research. I just never believed it could happen to me, or that I could do it. Now, this is a big moment. This is the moment you come out of the bleachers and you get on the playing field, because in order for that person to prove that their mind can affect their body, they would have to show up every day and do the work. If they don't show up, then they don't believe it's possible. They do show up every day, they do believe it's possible. And you keep showing up every day, after a period of time, you start feeling worthy to receive it. And the universe only gives us what we think we're worthy of receiving. So it's the overcoming process that is the becoming process. People who are sick in this work, I can guarantee you, with stage 4 cancer that has metastasized to every organ, every tissue, every bone in their body, and they've gotten the diagnosis and the prognosis, I'm sure there were days where they felt fear. And they had to make one of two choices, to either do the work or surrender to fear. And they showed up that day, and they overcame their fear a little bit more and surrendered to love. That's a victory. There were days where I'm certain they didn't feel good. They didn't feel physically good, and I know that it was probably hard for them to think greater than how they felt. They couldn't do that if they were still their body. They would have to get beyond their body in order to change, and they showed up that day and they overcame their body a little bit more. And I'm sure there were days where they had self-doubt. In fact, many of them, their disease got worse before it got better, and they could have easily listened to their family and to the voice in their head that said it's not working. But they showed up anyway, and they did the work, and they overcame their doubt that day. And I know there were days where they thought they didn't have enough time because they had children and work and all kinds of obligations. But they made time. And it was the overcoming that actually created the becoming. And so they weren't visualizing anything. They weren't affirming anything. They were changing. Now, many of them would have a great meditation, get up feeling wonderful, feeling like connected to the emotions of their future, and their sleeping patterns got better. They've had more energy, their pain diminished, but their blood values and their scans were still the same. They didn't say, oh, well, I kind of got a little bit better, but this doesn't work. That would be the old self, returning back to the old personality. They were more concerned about what they still had to change about themselves in order for their health to change. So they realized that many of them, 1 hour of meditation and feeling wonderful, and then spending 15 hours of your remaining day reacting and responding to everyone and everything in your life and believing those thoughts that are just hardwired programs in the brain and acting and behaving like the old self. Genes aren't going to change that way. So all of a sudden now it became practical. I got to get so good at doing this with my eyes closed. But I got to do it with my eyes open. Now, this is the big game because you got to be able to self-regulate. And so what became very practical to them is, now I'm going to rehearse how I'm going to be on the Zoom call. Now I'm going to rehearse how I'm going to be with my children, how I'm going to be with my ex. I'm going to monitor my responses. There's got to be a better way to be. Now the game becomes very real, right? Mm-hmm. And then they review at the end of the day, when did I fall from grace? When did I lose it? When did I go unconscious? Tomorrow's another lifetime. Right. I didn't fail. I just went unconscious. Okay, tomorrow I'm going to just work on that one thing. So now they're really working on the process of transformation. It's no longer about their health condition. They're not focused on their health condition. They're focused on change, right? And nothing changes in our life until we change. So when you hear those stories and the person has to really overcome their belief that this could work for everybody else, they just never believed it could work for me. When they get really super aware that the game is about change, and they got to get really good at doing it with their eyes open, and they have to monitor their responses to everyone and everything in their life, because if they don't, their response is actually weakening the organism. They got to catch their thoughts, because that thought that they let slip by could actually knock their brain and body out of homeostasis and turn on the stress response. So now the game changes now, and it takes an enormous amount of energy, and it takes an enormous amount of awareness. And it's not easy, and if it was easy, everybody would be doing it. But you ask that person who stands on the stage, that's the 4-minute mile, about their disease. They'll tell you two things. My disease was my greatest teacher. They'll tell you that. And you'll ask them, where is the disease now? Where is it? They'll say, it's in the old person. I'm somebody else. They didn't visualize anything. They didn't affirm anything. They just kept practicing overcoming, and it's the overcoming process that actually affects the becoming process.
Okay. And it all starts with the meditation, the closed eye meditation. But then, as you said, that's not enough. Then that has to permeate into your open eye meditation, which is the rest of your consciousness.
Well, that's why I created the walking meditations.
Yeah, and I know you do this in your 7 days retreats.
Well, you come to a week-long event. I mean, there's a study done by a Harvard scientist that took a group of men in their 70s and 80s to a monastery north of Harvard. These guys are 70 plus and 80 years old, and she asked these men for 5 days to pretend that they were 22 years younger, and not to reminisce about being 22 years younger, but actually thinking that way, acting that way, and feeling that way. And she put pictures of the Kennedy brothers and Marilyn Monroe and Nat King Cole and the Cuban Missile Crisis and magazines, and reminded them of being 22 years younger. At the beginning of the study, she measured all kinds of different objective things. They measured their height, their weight, their eyesight, their hearing, their cognition, their finger lengths, their toe lengths, their range of motion, all these objective measurements, and they cut them loose for 5 days. The researcher said at the end of 5 days, she was playing touch football with these men without their canes. She brought them back into the lab, and she took all those objective measurements again. Finger lengths were longer, toe lengths were longer. That means arthritis was better. Some of them were taller. Some of them weighed less. The majority of them could see better, could hear better. Their cognition improved by 60%. Their range of motion changed. So the question is, who are you pretending to be, or who are you pretending not to be? Those men couldn't say, finger lengths get longer, toe lengths get longer, brain work better. They had to become that person. So I thought, okay, what if we took a group of people for 7 days instead of 5 days, and let's do the same measurements. We do all kinds of measurements. Immerse them in an environment where knowledge and information could be applied, personalized, and demonstrated, initiated in some way. Set up the conditions in the environment, but don't just let them learn the information. They got to be able to learn it so well that they could actually teach it to someone. So they have no doubt, nothing's left to conjecture, to superstition, to dogma. They know exactly what they're doing and why they're doing it. Set up the conditions in the environment, give them the right instruction, and have them practice. Now, if you're in the monastery for 7 days, you can't just do the meditations, then finish the meditation, get on the line for lunch and cut someone off or be mean or start complaining and blaming. That's not the part of the monastery. So in my personal life, I would have great meditations, and then I just realized I just returned back. And so I said, well, we got to practice walking with our eyes open. So we do these walking meditations, not for any other reason. You got to go start practicing with your eyes open like you do with your eyes closed. So let's start. Change our energy. Let's get in our heart. Once energy makes it to the heart, we have so much data that says the heart's going to inform the brain that it's time to create. It's safe to create. So then let's get relaxed in our heart and awaken our brain. Let's change our energy. Let's remember this feeling. Now let's open our eyes and let's walk as this person. Now let's practice. Just like an actor would practice. Let's get in that state. Let's feel the feeling. Let's embody the energy, the emotion of our future. How would you walk if you were healthy? How would you stand? How would you move? How would you breathe? What would be the posture when you felt unlimited instead of when you felt beaten up, unworthy? And there's a whole different physiology and mechanism that takes place. So you keep practicing something. Whatever you practice, you become. You practice suffering, you'll get really good at it. You practice feeling grateful, you'll get really good at that. So good at it that you'll believe, behave, and ultimately become it. So then the walking meditations are a great way for people to practice with their eyes open, moving into the state. And so that we can maintain this modified state of mind and body, and it starts becoming habituated. It starts becoming who we are.
What does that look like at your event? Is everyone walking around?
Like, so you have to see this.
But they're silent.
They're silent.
But they're embodying everything. It makes it harder when you're walking because now your eyes are open, you're walking. It's one thing to do it when you're sitting down and do all the visuals,
right.
But now you're walking, you have to take your concentration to another.
They go through 3 days of solid training and seated meditations. And then we say to them exactly what you've been doing seating the first 5 minutes, 15 minutes of the meditation. You're going to just go out and do the exact same thing standing. So you're going to evolve the experience. Okay, I got 3 days doing this. I'll start off standing. They start off standing. Then we teach them about trance, how to open your awareness. And trance, you change your brain waves. When you change your brain waves, you're more suggestible to information because you suppress your analytical mind, right? So they broaden their focus, they open their eyes. There's 1,500 people on a beach. There's 2,000 people walking along a river.